CIG was just live on Twitch, and in this video we're going to briefly cover what they talked about. Keep in mind that just because all of this information is coming from CIG themselves does not mean that it is set in stone. Everything can always change. On the show today, there were 3 members of the leadership development team: Richard, Rick, and JJ. One of the biggest questions about 3.23 is, will there be a wipe?
Yes, so we're going to look to wipe Alpha UEC and rentals, I believe, and that's purely because if we don't, all of the analytics that we get back from people playing the game are going to be basically false reports, because people are going to be using all of their banked cash, and it'll just be like, oh, people are just buying all of these now more expensive items, for example, and that then tells us like, oh, do we need to make these more expensive? No, not really. It's just that people are using giant cash reserves that they've been keeping for a long time. So while it might be disappointing for some people to lose the money they've built up, it really, really helps us in informing us, like, have we pushed the economy in the right direction, so we can keep making iterations and informed decisions going forward.
I personally thought that there was going to be no wipe for 3.23. However, it is good that a wipe is coming. It is necessary for them to try to figure out the health of the economy changes that they have made. I personally think they're going in the right direction by raising costs and giving us more things to sink our money into. The developers did confirm that the space cows, the space whales, and yes, even the space worm are still in development. However, as we know, they each bring a unique set of problems to get them into the game. The Copion was an animal that they were able to get into the game within the time frame that they were shooting for. As well, it will pair well with some of the early missions that they have planned. The short answer about the economy is that they're reevaluating all the prices within the game. They've already looked at guns, they're now looking at ships. They're trying to rebalance everything so that when you look at the cost of fuel, repairs, restocking, or whatever, the cost actually makes sense. And while we're all hoping for more word about the economy, that is a pretty important thing to get done in the game.
There was a couple of other things that we looked at too. So we also looked at balancing Salvage out, because I think that had not had a thorough pass before. And we kind of saw people just getting millions upon millions of UEC through salvaging. So we felt that that was basically flooding our economy with Alpha UEC. So that was causing problems with people. You know, the value of things just go down so much and it becomes meaningless when you can kind of exploit a system like that. So we've applied some more logic to that and brought the kind of like gains down on what you can get from salvage.
JJ also went on to explain that the mission rewards have been adjusted as the risk versus rewards were not copacetic. The implication there is that we should be seeing higher rewards for at least some of the missions out there. While there is a card for reputation changes in 3.23, the developers go on to explain to us that really it's setting up the foundation for the future of reputation. Specifically, they mention things for like when Pyro comes into the game. Although they do specify that there will be some factions like the Duster factions within Stanton and will only be hostile if you're hostile to them first.
Sniper Glint. WTF, man?
JJ goes on to explain that Sniper Glint was an easy, low-cost way to warn us about snipers. With Death of a Spaceman always on the minds of CIG, they want to make sure that we don't die seamlessly out of nowhere and that there's at least some kind of warning that danger is afoot. Will Sniper Glint stay in the game or will something else take its place? JJ's not sure, but this is a test and trial to see how things work and how the community responds. Long story short, Sniper Glint easy to put in, test, and things will always be adjusted.
Well, ship scanning is meant to just be detecting what's outside of your ship, right? It's air exploitation of the world around you. So that's kind of inherent in the nature of it. If I understand the question correctly, it's like, I want to be able to detect stuff on my ship, which is going to be handled by FPS scanning, which is one of the features that we're working on moving over from Squadron to SE right now.
Due to the hot topic that is Master Modes, Richard takes his time to explain the genesis of where it comes from and what their thought process was. There's too much to really cover over here, but the short version of it all is that this is by far not the last iteration of Master Modes. They have to get it into the game so that they can get the data. They need to see where the pros and cons are on the large scale of things, and then the tweaks and changes are going to continue. And this is not going to be what Master Modes will be in a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. And this brings us to probably the most important segment in today's episode. Alpha is a test environment. We have EPTU, PTU, Tech Preview, Evocati, and Live. We as players often think of Live as a released game to a certain degree at least. However, it truly is a test environment, and it is the biggest sandbox for them to use to gather the information that they need to further develop the game. I believe most of us, and I'm included in that, lose sight of that sometimes. The developers were asked about the input lag and the desync that we find on the EPTU. The developers went on to say that they believe that they've narrowed it down to a networking issue between the communication of the replication layer and the servers, which obviously we wouldn't have seen before as it hasn't been in the game yet. And while they've instituted a lot of tweaks and fixes that have brought it back in and gotten it more tight, the problem is without more data, they can't really track down more of the problem. While we are expected to see more issues when it goes to live, this is going to give them the data that they need so that they can really hone in and hammer out those problems. The next 4 questions we're just going to rapid fire here. So the first one is, should 3.23 have been a smaller patch? Richard answered this by saying that he didn't really want all these new features to be dragged out over the next year or so he really wanted to get them all in as fast as possible. And there really isn't much more to it than that. Really, we learned nothing new here that we haven't learned from chat already. There were issues with the cargo and the loading, and Richard gave it a no-go because it just wasn't ready enough. And since that is such an integral part to the game, you know, flying in our spaceships, that he didn't want to put it in the verse and have so many people have so many problems. Speaking of personal hangars, when it does come in a 3.23.x patch, are we going to have the opportunity to change where our home base is if we wanted to change our mind? There was a little confusion about this because JJ answered it and said that you could use a character reset tool potentially, but the character reset tool actually doesn't give you a full reset and it doesn't allow you to change your home base. So the answer is no. Wherever you choose for 3.23, that's where your personal hangar is going to be. Why can't we use it as a home base? JJ goes on to explain that they are planning for that to be the case, but there's a lot of issues because of the in-game legalities and the fact that pirates use it so much. They really don't want a new player to pick Grimhex and then be shot every time they leave the hangar. So they're working on ways to kind of remedy that and make it so that it can still be a pirate place, but people aren't going to just be ganked all the time. Rick and the other developers pretty much go on to talk about how much they love Arena Commander, as they've also worked on it so much themselves. However, since Star Citizen is the priority, Arena Commander is just not going to get the love that everyone wants to give it for the time being. However, that does not mean it's dead. They do have plans to still use Arena Commander to test things. It's just not going to be as robust as anyone was really hoping for. Richard here discusses about expanding gameplay for those that want to be a bad guy. He discusses that in the future, you'll even be able to join guilds, work your way up from the bottom to the top, earn ranks, earn privilege, things of the like. And Richard also talks about one of the biggest problems with the gameplay right now, which is that normally it's a bad guy victimizing a lawful good player. And while that will always be a possibility in the future, they want to expand that to also include bad guy versus bad guy, and even bring missions in to do that. With all the changes that Star Citizen has had in the past few years, One of the main concerns I've heard is, am I even going to be able to solo this game? This topic is so important that I'm going to let the devs speak for themselves for the next couple of minutes. But listen out, because there's some interesting facts that they reveal. Manufacturing Idrises, the fact that they're not going to superimpose some random limit on players. NPC Blades even had a little mention.
Obviously, if you want to be a solo player, just because we're a massively multiplayer online game shouldn't preclude you from playing solo. You know, I've played many MMOs where I've just played by myself and got through to the end game. There will obviously be certain prerequisites as you move towards the larger goals in the game that are going to make it difficult for you to achieve as a solo player. For example, if you wanted to try and earn an Idris in the game and earning reputation to be able to, you know, figure out how to be able to manufacture your own Idris, and then you need to go and gather all the resources to be able to do that, that is a very, very large initiative. Almost to the point where when you even have that Idris, you're going to need multiple people to fly it proficiently. So I think, you know, that doesn't mean that there is not going to be a large amount of content that is achievable by solo players, that they'll be able to have enjoyment and combat, for trading, to mining, to salvage, to all the other aspects of gameplay that we want to be. If you want to be a farmer, you can go and be a farmer, right? But the expectation is that, you know, we are a massive multiplayer online game. We will have a large amount of content that is available to solo players, but that does mean there will be some content that is easier to achieve with more than one player.
Much like real life. It's like there's lots of things you can do on your own, and some things you have to accept a little bit of help on.
Yeah, we're not putting hard limits on. You can always try and do it yourself.
Absolutely.
Like, you can get all the materials for an Idris. You can build it yourself. Like, if you
And you know there will be.
yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in fact, in the future, we've talked about the possibility of being able to hire NPCs to help you fly your ship and stuff like that. I mean, that's probably far down the road, but it's something we want to do to enable that kind of gameplay.
Yeah, that's literally probably the oldest thing, going all the way back to the Wingman's Hangar days. So happy to hear that it's not completely gone.
It's in the roadmap.
Yep.
All right.
And to wrap up this episode, the last question was to JJ about Nightvision. He confirms that they have figured out how to do Nightvision within the game now, and that they're actually working with it for optics on our weapons. However, to translate that to cockpits and visors is actually a bigger feat than you would think. And then Richard comes in and clarifies a couple of things. One, it's not necessarily night vision, it's light enhancement. The whole point of it is that you're going to be able to see in the dark. What that difference actually means, we're going to have to see. He did specify that there is a difference. Two, Richard goes on to explain that the tech is figured out. The issue now is scheduling it to get developers on it to implement it. I want to stress that this was just a summary of what we saw today in the video. I highly recommend that if you have the time to go listen to it for yourself. There's always going to be little tidbits and some context that just doesn't translate 100% in a summary. This is also the first time I've ever done a video like this, so if you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments down below. Give me a like, give me a subscribe. We are on the journey to 1,000 subscribers. Until the next video, adventurers, bye-bye!